Hey, folks, thanks an awful lot for your time today. My name is Mike Trahan, and thanks to the nice people at Clean Water Action for partnering up with this event. We'd like to talk to you about a program called Virtual Net Metering. It is something that a number of municipalities have been involved with in Connecticut for a number of years. So we can go to the next slide, Ann. First, a little bit about SolarConnecticut. We are the solar associations for home solar and commercial solar contractors that are operating in the state of Connecticut. We spend an awful lot of time educating legislators on new policy ideas and working at the Public Utility Control and doing the same thing. Our members are businesses who do residential systems, commercial systems, and a little bit of both. So first, what we're not talking about today is the difference between virtual net metering and net metering. We're going to hear from a gentleman who is in part of a energy committee who's got a lot of experience with virtual net metering. We're going to have a couple of commercial developers on the call to answer any questions and fill in the gaps of things that we may have missed. And so we'll take some questions from you at the end. What this webinar is not, this is not an advertisement for developers. Right now, the virtual net metering program, as we'll explain it to you, is virtually closed. It's capped to begin with, and it appears, and the contractors talk about this in a minute, that all of the available virtual net metering credits have been pretty much spoken for. What we want to hope to accomplish today is A, help you understand the program. B, if you think this is something that you'd like to work that might make sense for your municipality, don't call us. At this point, the best call is to be made to state legislators and let them know that when they get back to the legislature, if they get back, hopefully sometime this summer, that they take up this program. We understand that legislators are interested in doing something on virtual net metering, opening the program up. We'd like to see them take the cap off entirely so all municipalities can participate. But job one, let's get you up to speed on the program, and we'll go from there. So virtual net metering has been around for the last 4, 5, 6 years. It's a spin-off for those of you not familiar with net metering. Net metering is when residential and commercial solar owners have excess generation from their system that they don't need. That electric power is then pushed back onto the electric grid, and the project owner, the homeowner, or the business owner is then compensated at the retail level. For every kilowatt of electric power that they don't use that's pushed back onto the electric grid, they earn a credit. It's squared up at the end of the year, and everybody's happy. Virtual net metering is a little bit different. For municipalities, for the state of Connecticut, and for farms, you can use virtual net metering to generate electric power on one site, a host. The municipality could host the system, or a farm could host the system, or state property owner could host the system. That power is then pushed back, some or all of it, onto the electric grid, and then that power really becomes a credit, and that credit is assigned a value. And those credits are then shared or applied virtually to municipal electric bills to another municipality somewhere else in the same utility territory. That's basically virtual net metering. We're going to talk, that's a 30,000-foot level version. Well, I'm going to dig into that just a little bit, and we'll have our experts answer any questions you have at the end. Next slide, please. So real quick, so last year, lawmakers in Hartford increased the virtual net metering cap from what it was at $10 million. They doubled it to $20 million. We had asked them to do roughly $50 million. This is not an appropriation. This is not adding to the state budget. This is the value of the credits that are generated and then applied to other bills. So right now, the maximum amount of virtual net metering credits that can be transferred or applied is $20 million. That program is divided up between municipalities, state, and agricultural users. This past March, before COVID-19 shut down the state legislature, we had agreement from the Energy Committee chairs that they would bump that $20 million cap to $40 million. We'd show them that the demand is there for that. Right now, the program is pretty much exhausted. There's no cap space. So we are trying to get the legislators to understand that there really is demand for the program. Next slide, please. So here's a quick couple of icons to show you how the program works. We're talking about solar power, clean, discounted solar power to municipalities with no upfront cost. We're talking about municipalities that benefit from the program, who purchase the credits. There's no changes to your current electricity purchasing plan that you have with the utility company, and if you're purchasing the credits or having the credits applied to your bill, you're not using any property or buildings in your municipality. So there's really two spokes to this. If you're in virtual net metering, you're either going to host, you're going to have a football-sized field or larger ground mount solar system built in your municipality on a piece of land that has little or no value, and you'd like to bring value to that property, earn property tax revenue on it. You would then be the host. You might perhaps even be the beneficiary of some of that electric power, or you're not hosting the system at all. You're going to work with a developer to strike an agreement, a contract, to have some of those credits that are generated on those systems in another town applied to your bill. Next slide, please. Quick diagram. Moving from left to right, if you're the host, and this is, we're using Eversource as a case history. You're hosting the system. The electric power is uploaded to the electric grid. There's a value assigned to it. It becomes a credit. And then after that, it's really an accounting process. The developer works with the utility company, Eversource or UI, to decide which electric meters in which municipalities are assigned these virtual net metering credits, and then the savings begin to accrue. Municipalities, some of you on the phone may have looked into this already. Municipalities right now are standing in line to have these credits applied to their bill, because a unit of virtual net metering power costs them less than a unit of grid power. They're literally a line of people looking to get these credits, and a line for developers to apply for projects going forward. So that's the program from the 30,000 foot level. Next slide, please. If you're on this list, you're one of the lucky ones. You fit under the current cap. And when we talk to legislators, we talk mostly to legislators who represent towns who are not on this list. And once they find out, how come my municipality cannot benefit from virtual net metering? And our response back to them is, well, lift the cap on the program so that everyone could participate. We're starting to get traction. It worked last year. They doubled the program from 10 million to 20 million. This last previous session of this year, back in January and February, legislators heard it loud and clear from municipal leaders who wanted the program increased. They decided to double the program size again from 20 to $40 million. Although the legislature has to go back in the session and they have to approve that increase this year if the program is sized to be increased. Next slide. So again, this past March, the $20 million on the virtual metering cap program was exhausted, although legislative leaders agreed in principle to increase the cap from 20 to $40 million. We're asking actually legislators to lift the cap for 2 years. We understand that municipalities are hurting through COVID. They're not getting fees and other revenues that they normally would. And here's a way for them to generate some revenue, either by hosting a system or to save some money by reducing their electric bill by having these credits applied to their electric bill. Lawmakers need to hear it from municipal leaders that are currently shut out of the program right now. You're the best allies. We've talked to them quite often, and you know, they hear us enough to have doubled the program. If the program is, if the big doubled this year, if the cap's going to come off, they really need to hear from you. Next slide. Okay, enough for me. Steve Wagner is on the line. Steve, you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Terrific. Yeah, absolutely. Steve is very familiar with virtual net metering projects, been involved with several of them, and he's here to give you his perspective. Go right ahead, Steve.
The slide tells it all about me. I happen to be the chair of our energy committee in South Windsor. I also serve on the Planning and Zoning Commission, where we've made some solar regulations, but that's a topic of another talk. So if you go to the next slide, please. South Windsor actually has 3 projects going. One has been in business since December 2017, and all the way and through 2019, we saved almost $150,000 by getting these credits. That project is projected to serve save $1.4 million for the town over a 20-year period. So it's pretty significant. We're about to sign a contract for a second project, which is Powder Hill and Enfield. That project is 2.8 million kilowatt DC, which means it's going to generate 3.6 million kilowatt hours of electricity. We're actually using that project to supplement the savings we're getting from some rooftop solar that's being installed on our schools. So these are not incompatible. You can put some solar on the rooftop. You will find almost certainly that the rooftop doesn't have enough room to satisfy all of the demand for a school. Therefore, it's nice to get some additional credits from a different type of project. There's actually a third project we're working on. Up until I think yesterday, we were talking about Sand Hill in North Canaan. I think we're going to be switching to a different location, but either way, we're taking 33% of that project. And we're expected to get $500,000 out of savings out of that. We have set a goal to have 100% of our electric usage come from solar, either directly on the roof of these schools or through this virtual net metering project. We have that goal for 2025. So you can go to the next slide, please. That's a picture of the original NorCap South project that I told you about. Next slide. This is the work in progress on Powder Hill. And you can see that it looks like in this picture, the racking is almost completely done. And out in the back, you can see they're starting to install panels. Move on to the next one, please. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about how this whole thing looks to you if you're a utility that's going to benefit from these credits. So the credits are based on the generation at the site. In other words, there's a meter there, measures the amount of electricity that the facility produces. And then those are turned into dollars based on those kilowatt hours that are generated. And it starts with 100% of the utilities standard R30, which is the small business rate for generation. Small building, I guess, is probably a better way of describing it. So that's the generation part. There's another part of the bill, of our electric bill, called transmission and distribution. You get some credit for that. In the first year, you get 80% of that. That's kind of an incentive to help everyone get started. It dribbles off to 60% the second year. And after that, you're getting 40% of the T&D. So you get 100% of the generation based on the R30 rate, not on what you're paying to whatever company you're buying your electricity from, plus some fraction of T&D. The rates do rise, we hope will rise over the years, at least from this perspective. And so at some point you're going to reach a limit which is set by the contract with Eversource. So you'll be getting less than 100% of that R30 rate. Note, if you haven't looked at your electric bills lately, the rates adjust every 6 months. And in the first half of the year, they tend to be higher. That's because of the demand for natural gas during the heating season. So all of these credits show up on your electric bill, on your municipality's electric bill. If you go to the next slide. So now the vendor who built this thing needs to pay for financing and needs to pay for operating. So they will then charge you a portion of the credit. And that's determined by your contract with the vendor. In our case, we're working with Lodestar, and we have a contract with them that determines how much we pay. Might be a nominal percentage of the flat rate, or a flat rate. So it could be a percentage of the credit or a flat rate, depending on who you're working with. The vendor may need to have a minimum dollars per kilowatt hours, and that helps them cover their financing and make sure they can pay their operating costs. They do have costs. They have to maintain the system. If something breaks or burns out, they have to mow it, they have to bill you, and so there's some expenses for running the facility that they have to cover. So what can happen, and what actually happened during this pandemic, is the rates could fall substantially below the projections that we've been using. So in that case, normally you're going to get less than the nominal savings that you may be showing on all of your projections. There's even a slight chance that the savings could turn negative for a brief period. So it turns out in the case of our NorCap South project, we're losing, I think, $750 this 6-year period, not getting these savings that we hope to get. But everything we're hearing now is that those rates are going to bounce back pretty well next year. If you go to the next slide, please. So the key thing with this is that the credits show up on your electric bill as dollars, not as kilowatt hours. So you got a number of things you're paying for. You're paying for the generation to some supplier. In our case, it's a company called ENGIE, E-N-G-I-E. You're paying for transmission and distribution of electricity to your facility. You're paying for something called demand. You may have taken out a loan with the utility that's being paid off through the electric bill. All these things are, listed above the, the credit. So the credit then goes and offsets any of those types of expenses, and you get the savings from the credit that's, cover anything that's on that bill. The neat thing is with streetlights, streetlights are not metered. You don't meter the electricity. There's an assumption about how much electricity they're going to use. It's a different amount every month, depending on how long the daylight is or how long the night is in this case. And there's even equipment and rental charges. All of these things can be covered by these credits. And in fact, as far as I know, virtual net metering is really the only way you can power your streetlights with solar. And the neat thing is, if you happen to get more credits than you can use in any given period, that they don't expire. They can hang around for months or years until you're ready to use them. So your ability to use these credits depends on your annual costs on a given account, not on the kilowatt hours you use. So you may be saying, well, I can absorb 3.6 million kilowatt hours, but actually you need to look at the dollars that you're spending on your electric bill. And those costs can be reduced by your rooftop solar. That's what's called behind the meter solar. So Eversource doesn't bill you for the electricity that you use that doesn't go out onto their system, that you don't buy from them. So you have to be careful if you're putting rooftop solar on to try to project how much that's going to reduce your electric bill from Eversource or whatever utility. You may be planning to do some efficiency improvements. So if you're going to reduce your electric bill by 10 or 15% by installing more advanced lighting or other systems, that could reduce your ability to absorb these credits. And finally, well, for us, we were in the process of converting our streetlights to LED. And so every month, literally, our streetlight bill was going down as more and more of the lights were converted to LEDs. Now we're kind of in a mode where there aren't too many left to convert. When one of the old ones burns out, it's turned into an LED. So we're pretty close to complete, and we know just how much electricity we're being charged for those LED streetlights. And one other warning, Again, we're talking about credits in dollars, not kilowatt hours. And you got to be really careful when you look at your sewer plant, because that's treated like a factory, like a manufacturing facility, and not like an office building. So the rates are generally lower in a sewer plant. And again, look at the annual dollar bill when you're deciding how much you can absorb in the way of these credits. So that's, I think, pretty much all I had to offer. And I'll be around to answer questions if the others can't.
Terrific, Steve. Thanks very much. You know, Ann, I believe that there's an opportunity for participants to chat questions at us. Is that?
Yes, that's right. Let me make sure that you can chat or you can use the question and answer. And I think between Patrice and I, or you, Mike, we can field those questions so that everyone's questions are getting addressed.
Great. Do we have, is Jamie and Noel also able to speak at this time?
I believe so. I haven't heard
Okay.
them.
Jamie, do we have you?
I'm on. Yeah, I'm on.
Great.
Happy to answer any questions as they come in, Mike.
Yeah, sure. Well, I tell you what. So Jamie Smith and Noel Lafayette have agreed to spend some time on the phone and take questions. Jamie, did we miss anything? Or is there anything that should be emphasized anymore? Why don't you start, and then we'll give Noel a shot.
You know, I'm looking at some of the chat questions that came in, and there was a question early on about why is there resistance to expanding the cap from Jonathan Steinberg, actually, Representative Steinberg. So, Mike, do you want to take that? I think that's a good question.
Sure. So we've got some terrific allies in the legislature. One is State Representative John Steinberg of Westport. I hope he doesn't mind me calling him out. There are others who would like to see fairness in the process here and pushed very hard for a larger program and to lift the cap altogether. Because municipalities can apply credits to their bill and save money rather than doing it the way they traditionally would, which would be to purchase power from their current supplier, those current suppliers aren't enthusiastic about it, as you might imagine. We are working very hard to put as much in-state clean power on the electric grid and make that power available to whomever wants it, municipalities through the virtual net metering program, or on behind the meter, where private landowners can enjoy the benefits of solar that way as well. But I think anytime you're talking about disrupting the current process, solar energy, all renewable energies are all disruptive technologies. When you disrupt the status quo, those who appreciate the status quo are not happy about it. So, and some of those groups have lobbyists at the Capitol and are pressing to keep the program as is, or maybe have it go away. But that said, do we have Noel? Is there anything we missed? No, I know you had one area I think that you wanted to emphasize. Noel, might you be muted, perhaps?
Hey, Mike.
Jamie, did you want?
Mike, I saw another
Yeah.
question. I'm reading the chat, and I saw some more questions about how did the savings go negative.
Sure,
so
go right ahead.
Steve sort of hinted at how that can happen. So there are the credits. Remember, we're taking a value of this energy and we're converting it into dollars, into a credit. And then, as Steve mentioned, there's a bunch of different ways you can basically pay for that credit. You could come up with a rate, and you could just pay for that credit a certain rate. And that credit right now, let's call it 15 cents. So you could agree to pay, 12 cents for that. The problem is that 15 cents moves around. So most towns don't really want that risk, right? If you just fix the amount, said I'm going to pay 10 cents for that or 12 cents for that. It's worth 15 today. There's a risk that that goes down because the rate adjusts and has a market mechanism. The way that some developers get around that is by offering a discount, saying, hey, as long as the rate floats, why don't we just agree on a discount percentage? The challenge with the discount percentage is we developers can't borrow sufficiently and have a problem going to our banks on a pure floating rate. We need some kind of a minimum. And so what a developer might do is try to create a minimum that's very low, that is never going to happen, but sets a minimum floor for the rate for the credits. What happened through this pandemic is there was an incredibly, probably unexpected short-term drop that created some rates that really the forecast didn't see. And so that has the chance to reduce the savings projections. And it's just something that whoever you work with as a town, you should be working with your energy consultants, and you should be working with a quality developer to do modeling and forecasting about what happens under different energy scenarios. And that's really what someone who's good in this space should do for you. You should be able to go out and say, what happens if, what if, what if, what if, and you should predominantly be saving money in those situations. And as Steve said, they're not going to save as much as they hoped on the existing project, but they're not going to lose anything either. So they go to less than their full savings for a short period of time, and then the rates come right back and everything comes back to normal.
Steve, there was a question directed towards you about the RFP process. Was that something that you went down, or was there a need to go down that road?
In our case, at the time we entered into these deals, there was we didn't see any available competition, so we did not go down that process. However, certainly available, and I think it would be a good idea for most towns to try to go down that path.
Mm-hmm.
And is there, I think Noel is listed as a participant rather than a panelist. I think he might want to chime in.
Okay, let me see if I can address that, Mike.
Okay. Jamie, are you seeing other questions there about the cost of power not being uniform? Is that something we can get into? Or maybe Jamie, you could talk a little bit about time of construction, how the timetable generally works.
Happy to handle both of those. So the bulk of the time is to get the site permitted properly, and depending on the size of the project, some projects are permitted through the local jurisdictions, and some are permitted through the Connecticut Siting Council. So that process can, kind of be all over the place, but time-wise. But once the permitting is done, you're talking about a 3 to 5 month construction process. So doesn't take a long time once we have the go to build the project, but it can take, right now the Siting Council is taking upwards of 6 months for the projects, just given COVID-19 and all the things that they go through to make sure that there's nothing's being disturbed. We're doing all the right things around stormwater, that we're doing the right things around species, archaeological studies. There's a lot that goes into making sure that it's a good site. And what was the second question, Mike?
Well, there was a question here. Virtual net metering seems to be about financial engineering. Why would a municipality go with an outside developer versus funding the construction of their own solar array?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because we can take advantage, a developer can take advantage of the federal investment tax credit. We can subsidize about 30% of the costs of the solar project. A municipality, if they were building their own project, wouldn't be able to take advantage of that. So we can make it more cost effective to go out and do that. That's not to say that you shouldn't do both. As Steve was talking about, they're putting solar on rooftops on their schools, but they've still got credits they can take advantage of because there are, they spend a lot on electricity, water treatment facilities, and their sewers. They're doing both. They're maximizing the solar up on the rooftops, and then they're maximizing their virtual net metering credits.
Actually, I should add that even if you put it on the roof, you're not going to own the solar. You're going to let someone else own it who's a profit-making company, and they will get those tax credits, and then you will do what's called a power purchase agreement to pay for the electricity that it produces, again, because of the tax credit situation.
Jamie, can you talk a little bit about for the host in terms of potential revenue opportunities that they wouldn't normally have on a piece of property that was vacant or unused?
Yeah, they would have an opportunity to get additional real estate taxes, and then many developers will get into a pilot agreement, a tax agreement for personal property, and negotiate a tax agreement. So really, there's some nice tax opportunities for someone who has the land. They also would get a lease and rent on that property. So if you were a town that had some unused land, you could go out and lease that land to developers and get the lease income, and then potentially some additional tax income. It's a great neighbor because it doesn't use up, doesn't use the schools, doesn't use the roads, doesn't make any noise, doesn't pollute. There's a lot of good things. Obviously, you want to be smart about where it's sited. And, you saw those pictures that Steve showed. The first project he showed was adjacent to a landfill. The next project he showed was a former gravel pit. So you want to be smart about locating these projects, and we developers want to put them in places where we're not bothering people either, and we want to find the cheapest land that can't be used for anything else. So that's kind of the natural inclination for us, is to use acres that houses can't be put on, Home Depots can't be put on, Amazon distribution centers, whatever it is. You can't do anything else with them. They could be next to a road, they could be next to a dump. Doesn't matter to us.
So I want to be conscious about time. We've used up our 30 minutes. I did want to make one last request to those on the line. Again, if the program is going to be made any larger so that more municipalities can participate, state legislators, your state senator, your members in the state house, they need to hear it from municipal officials. They need to hear it from Clean Energy Task Force or Energy Committee members or other renewable energy stakeholders, that virtual net metering is a good program. It is not a state budget issue. We're not adding money to the state budget. It is a program that municipalities want and need, especially now given all that's happened over the last 5 or 6 months. So if this is something that you think would work well in your municipality, either as a host or as a beneficiary, now is the time to pick up the phone, call your state legislator, or tell them to tell the Energy Committee to pass legislation to lift the cap on virtual net metering. And Patrice, Jamie, Steve, is there anything else that we've missed or we should mention? How can folks get a hold of the recording, and how would that work if they wanted to forward this to someone else?
As soon as we're done, Mike, I'm happy to send it out to everyone. So we have a list of everyone that registered, or I'm happy to send it to you and you can forward it, whatever's easiest.
Okay. There's a few other questions that came in that we didn't get to. One was, do you have a letter template to share that we can use when contacting representatives? And is it okay if folks email you questions that you could forward to me, and I would be happy to respond to them individually or to the group if whatever's appropriate? Would that work?
Sure, absolutely. And I'll type my email into the chat just so everybody has it readily available.
Also, there was a question in the chat from Michael Harris, and I don't think anyone tried to settle. Regarding savings going negative, it's my opinion that taxpayers should not have to take this risk on. What do you think of that? We had a really deep heart-to-heart discussion with our town council about that very subject, and you know, there's obviously some sharing of the risks that's going on. You have a business that's building and operating this facility, and you have a town that's hoping to benefit from it. And we looked at the long-term benefit of the project and said, you know, every once in a while, in some really weird circumstances like a pandemic, you might have to absorb some of that risk. We did some little negotiating that kind of reduced our exposure in the future projects, but there is some risk that can happen. And the idea is be upfront with your politicians, go over the whole program, make sure they understand the benefits and the risks. And when you sign a contract to buy electricity from a company to buy generation services, you're taking a risk that you could have done better. This is kind of in that category. So the council who represent the taxpayers looked at the long-term picture and said, this is a risk we're willing to take.
Jamie, let me push one more question at you that I see here. The cost of power is not uniform. When demand for feeder plants go online, then the cost of power goes up. Is cost of power flat or time of day regarding virtual net metering?
It's the R30 rate. So it was sort of set artificially for this program, which was a small commercial rate. So what you pay for electricity has nothing to do with this program, but the R30 rate does move around. And that rate has moved from, I don't know, something like between 10 and 15 cents, maybe 10 and 20 cents over the last, as far as I can go back and look at, but it's been hovering around 15 cents, that rate right now. So that's the generation and the transmission and distribution charge for the R30 rate. So again, you know, kind of very important. Doesn't really matter what you're paying for electricity. These credits are being monetized, and then those credits are showing up on your bill. You're buying dollar bills for something less than their face value.
That rate changes every 6 months.
I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
The R30 rate changes every 6 months with some slight variation on when they do the T&D, but it's set. It doesn't depend on time of day. You know, it's just a flat electricity rate that are charged to small businesses, and therefore, you know, you may have a contract for the electricity you buy that has that feature, but these credits are going to be pretty much at the same rate for an entire 6 month period.
Gotcha. I'll end on this one. Noel Lafayette, Noel, do you want to make a comment on part of the program, Noel?
I want to make comment on the culture around the program over years and all the municipalities I've dealt with. I appreciate the gentleman from South Windsor who was extremely knowledgeable. I think he might be able to share that it takes time to get to that level of knowledge, which most municipalities don't have. What we're seeing is that the politics of this has really shifted. One is, you know, municipalities that I spoke with 4 or 5 years ago who really didn't have an interest, now that they're really grasping the state's economic situation and the COVID reality, all of a sudden are calling back very quickly. I also want to talk about the history of the virtual net metering cap, and just to let people know there's always a wait list. If they raise the cap somewhat, as they have historically, you know, 10 million, it's gone in a matter of, you know, weeks. It's absorbed. So calling your legislators and emphasizing to them the importance of raising that cap as much as possible, it cannot be understated. It cannot be understated. It's one thing for the solar industry to say it, you know, we have a vested interest, but when they hear it from all of you, it's a very different thing. So I cannot emphasize enough, if this is something you're even remotely interested in, that cap has to be raised significantly in order to keep going. Two, another thing I went into quite a bit is the RFP question. This is, anyone who's been paying attention to the whole slideshow can see that this is a bit of a very complex situation. A lot of towns by charter have to go out to RFP or to lowest price or something like that. The only thing I gently disagree with the gentleman with South Windsor about is that I have seen that backfire more time than not. It's very difficult to get apples to apples comparisons. You know, when you want to buy a plow truck for your town, it's a spec. We want a Ford F-150. We want these options. We want this. Pretty easy to do. This is a complex financial arrangement. So I have found that the RFP thing tends not to work out. Because the developer has to have an approved site. They have a lot of things. They can quote you a lower number, and then they have all sorts of problems, and it never becomes manifest. You got to be sure that the developer has control of a site, has project halfway through development that they can sell. What I've also seen in the towns that have been very successful and it is getting as much solar as possible, whether it's rooftop or virtual net metering, whatever, is you have to have one or two people inside your town's government that is the champion, that really understands the issues, that really is kind of your point person for communication. Those towns that have two or three people that can commit to that really goes a long way. When you try to go through 3 or 4 all-volunteer boards with something this complicated, it gets really difficult, as you can imagine, right? So I highly recommend to any municipal leader on the phone, pick 1 or 2 people that are knowledgeable and that can commit to this and have them be your inner point person champion, because it's just too complicated to get 3 or 4 volunteer boards through it. It just doesn't work. In the cities, they usually have full-time energy people or sustainability people or facilities directors that understand it. In the smaller towns, you got to limit the amount of people weighing in. Otherwise, it just gets too confused. I run into that quite a bit. All right, that's about it.
No, thank you. Jamie Smith, thank you. Steve Wagner, thank you. And thanks most of all to Ann and Patrice at the Clean Water Action. We appreciate you helping us pull this off. That's our presentation, Ann.
It's our pleasure. This is an important topic and we're happy to help.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all for participating. And we'll answer
you.
those questions that we didn't get to. Yep.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.